much as more so the religion than really the ethnic background, because the language is pretty shared. So yeah, I mean, there are some big distinctions in contexts for sure.
Yeah, let me ask you another kind of big question. So it's kind of a pessimistic perspective, because from what you just said, and then even within the context of the talk, you would need like a massive, massive troop deployment to really control the majority of a decent-sized country and a bunch of money and so forth. But then I was thinking that, the UN missions, post-conflict missions, are somewhat more successful. We see more successful cases. So I'm trying to think about why that is. And maybe it's the case that the UN missions happen after the warring sides have already decided they're ready to reach peace, and it's consent-based, right? And so if that's true, then the other depressing implication is that you just have to let the war run its course. And at some point the two sides are just ready to stop fighting, and then they're willing to consent-based bring in outsiders to kind of reassemble the society. Is that a conclusion that you're comfortable with, or would you push back against it?
So I think one interesting thing, before I answer your question, I'll sort of pivot slightly. So there's been some interesting commentary, particularly as the US and the Taliban have negotiated recently, right? At the strategic level, ultimately, as with most conflicts between a rebel group, a government, even with or without a foreign intervener, there's this basic commitment problem, right? Which is that one side or the other, or both, have to give up some of their arms, have some changes in territory, do some sort of power sharing. And that agreement is not self-enforceable. So that is, those changes will change the strategic landscape, and one side or the other doesn't want to do that. So like right now, the main sticking point in the Afghanistan case is that the Taliban says to the US, the first thing is you have to leave, take your troops out. And then we promise we'll negotiate a deal with the Afghan government, right? And the Afghan government says, hey, you're selling us down the river. As soon as the troops are gone, then they're going to screw us over. They're going to, knock us out of power and take over again. So this sort of major strategic level commitment problem, in some sense, washes out all of this stuff, right? So the micro conflict component is like, okay, sure, what happens in these local districts with these local cells, but at the end of the day, to resolve the conflict has to be at the strategic level. And that's where I think the UN operates, right? They basically come in to play that enforceable role to resolve these commitment problems. So if, the Taliban and the government, if the UN Security Council came to an arrangement with those two that they would come in and enforce that deal, then yes, I think that sort of thing would happen. So I think the pessimistic side is simply that going in and doing this micro level, stuff, if it doesn't deal with the underlying commitment problem at the top level, is in some sense like rearranging chairs on the Titanic, so to speak. Rather than saying, the peace deal that Trump is trying to get today is the same one they could have gotten in 2009, the same one they could have gotten in 2011, the same one they could have gotten in 2014, in the other previous period. This underlying strategic relationship hasn't changed, and we've just basically been like, well, we don't like that deal, so we're going to keep spending money and sending troops. But that hasn't changed.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. So, if you were, I want to lay out sort of a very simple possible take on your work and tell me if you agree or disagree with it. So basically there's the relationship in the midst of civil wars between order and development. And one perspective would be you need to have order first, and that can sort of proceed and contribute to development. And the other would be you have development first, and that can proceed and contribute to order through sort of winning hearts and minds. And it seems like one takeaway here would be really the first of those two views is probably the more correct one, and the second one is very tenuous, right? Actually using development to bring about order.
Right.
Is that too oversimplified? I realize it's conditional. You can do an argument here, but what's your basic take on that way of sort of explaining this to students?
Yeah, I think that's basically right. I mean, ultimately, and this kind of gets back to Donnie's question too, to the extent that the order comes from a negotiated peace between the people that matter, that also ultimately is the thing that needs to happen, right? There's no amount of development that is going to sort of, you can't grow your way out of a commitment problem, right? I mean, that's one side or the other, or both, are going to have to make these decisions to stop fighting that will inhibit their ability, will tie their hands for the future. And unless something can sort of make it such that both sides feel like that future has it's a good future for both of them, they're not going to do it. And I guess the one case in which it appears that kind of development helps on that trajectory is one in which that commitment problem was resolved for this piece of work, right? And so, conditional on having conditional on resolving the commitment problem, development can help micro order, but maybe not macro order. Does that make sense?
This is sort of a random question, but with the factors of, the development projects themselves and the security that's provided, did you see any effects as to who specifically is providing that security, like in Afghanistan, whether it's contractors or conventional army units, or the more recently mobilized, like the SFAB units or language training that are always attached to the AMP?
Yeah. So I wasn't able to do that level of granularity. For one reason, it's very difficult. So the military tends not to want to give that information out. At the same time, it's interesting because one thing I did find was, so I know when units rotated in and rotated out, and I know the commanding officers of those units. It is the case that units that had commanders that were in country longer, the projects tended to be a little bit more successful. Not a huge effect, but in contested areas, they still increased violence, but not as much. And in controlled areas, they did reduce a little bit more. So there is some indication that kind of like there is learning, there is some expertise that kind of goes into the situation. But because the rotations are so fast, basically between 11 and 13-month rotations, every year you have new units essentially kind of relearning whatever the previous unit may or may not learn.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Super. Before we thank Dr. Sexton, I just want to note that we have our next talk again in February 27. Dr. Danielle Jung of the Emory Political Science Department will give a talk entitled "Of the People, Understanding Illicit Governance." I hope to see you all there. And before we leave, please join me in thanking Dr. Sexton for